Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the next video, and today we are going to be working on this crime against humanity. This is an 8-foot long super fish with two pretty funky little hips, epoxy construction. What else can I say about it, really? Obviously our customer has had a bit of an issue though. He had the lip of a wave fall on him, or on the board rather, preferably him really, and it has creased the board quite majorly. So we're going to give it a sand, cut it open and see how far that damage goes. It should be pointed out that the underside is fine. Now I know what you're thinking. Oh man, the ding repairer guy is going to have a whinge about EPS again and epoxy again. We all know he hates the stuff, we get it man. But that's only a half truth. The real reason I don't like this board is because I don't like fish that are more than 6'4". The whole concept doesn't really make much sense to me, and having two little wings down your rails to make that fish tail really narrow and almost more of a swallowtail, that also doesn't make much sense to me. So I don't care who makes it, any fish over 6'4", I'm generally just not sold by it. Here we have a death staple. So it isn't uncommon when working on boards like this that are made with a mold that you will find staples in the lamination, and very commonly along the rails. And when a board is made in a mold, before it goes in the mold, all of the fiberglass is laid dry on the board and it's all wrapped, but you need to be able to keep the fiberglass in place when it goes into the mold. So to do that, these guys will use these staples to hold those areas in place. I am surprised to find one here in the middle of the board. Usually you do find them around the cut lap or the tuck. I guess something like that is just to stop your cloth from rising and bubbling and getting like a pocket of resin or a pocket of air underneath your lamination. So by moving this top surface, we've discovered two things. The first thing is that, yes, the damage did come through to the foam ever so slightly in this area. There's a little bit here and here. So the damage did meet that foam. The second thing we have found out by doing this is that this skin, this molded skin, has done a really good job of keeping the water out of the EPS, which is what it's for, and it's done a really good job at that. So that means we can continue with our work. We don't need to leave it for weeks on end. So that is definitely a success for this style of construction. Its main purpose, I believe, is to, at all costs, keep water out of this foam. There have been previous repairs on both the nose and the tail as well. And so there was a bit of a fear that even if water didn't get into our crease, water potentially could have gotten into these original dings on the nose and tail, seeped the water through the board, each end was repaired, and that water would come out of here. But looks like no water got in any of these three dings, so that's really good news. Now my opinion of this type of board and this type of construction might actually surprise you. Putting aside the horrendous shape of the board, which just doesn't make much sense to me, my biggest concern and my biggest problem with EPS foam is its lack of durability when it meets water. The stuff just doesn't like water, but it does like channeling it. Now, regardless of what you think of companies like this, which are pumping these things out and shipping thousands around the world every single week, doing God knows what to local manufacturers and shapers businesses, one thing these guys have going for them is I believe they recognize this flaw with EPS. It's a really cheap foam, they can work with it, but the problem is it doesn't like water. So how do we make our boards last longer and take away that issue? And I think these molded skins do a really good job of keeping water out. A much better job than a normal lamination that someone like myself would do on a shaped EPS blank. There's multiple companies around the world making boards of this type of construction laid up in a mould, and there's multiple materials that have and are used in this type of construction. This board in particular, the Superfish number 2, it has expanding epoxy on the rails, it has that timber inlay, multiple different gauges of cloth running through it, the paint on top is an epoxy paint. So these guys at Global Surf Industries have really tried hard on this board to make a super lightweight, super strong board that has a really tough outer shell to keep water away from that EPS foam at all costs. Where most EPS and epoxy layups go wrong around the world, I believe, is that they're focusing really hard on lightweight, but they're not focusing really hard on how do we make sure water never gets into this blank. Regardless of what you think about this tough light type of construction and the results, at least these guys have focused on keeping the board water-free for as long as possible. So let's talk fiberglassing, and let's talk about what I like to call Rule 101 of fiberglassing surfboards. And that rule is that we never cut fiberglass in a straight line across a board from rail to rail. And the reason we don't do this is because that fiberglass in a straight line is strong enough to cause a buckle or a creasing point, and if the board was ever to buckle or crease again, it's more than likely that would occur at the end of our fiberglass. So when repairers and laminators are faced with a position of having to glass across from rail to rail, what they do is they cut the glass in kind of a diamond or an hourglass shape, so it sort of leads up to a point, and this helps displace the strength of that fiberglass cloth so that it's not just one big buckle point going across the board. This is most obviously seen on boards kind of around the fin boxes on the tail. Most of the time fin boxes will have patches of extra reinforcing glass over them, and quite often it's one big patch over the tail, and you'll notice a darker line in that board's colour, and it'll never be a straight line across the board, it'll always kind of taper up or down to a point. Here's a good looking example I stole from the internet so you can see those darker coloured patches over the fin boxes, and they're all cut into either diamonds or hourglass shapes. Now the reason I mention this is because it's no different when we're working on a crease like this as well. No matter how we choose to glass this repair, if you imagine for a minute that instead of filling that giant void from rail to rail with a soft, malleable material like foam, we filled it with a really hard, dense material like resin and microballoons, we would still be creating two buckle or snapping points in this board by creating a straight line made out of resin and Q-cell. Now I know what you're thinking, well no duh Uncle Dingman, that's obvious. Who would do such a thing? Well, let's look up on YouTube how to fix a crease in a surfboard and see the result we get. Uncle Tony here has a pretty bad crease in the nose of his surfboard, both the deck side and the underside, and he's forced to dig out on both sides a 1/4 to 1/2 inch worth of board to remove the damaged area. So what does he do? He then fills that 1/4 to 1/2 inch on both sides, mind you, with a super hard, super dense, non-flexible material. Let's be generous here and say originally the board was 2 inches thick in this area. So he's now filled up about 1 inch worth of that 2 inches with this super hard, unflexible Q-cell material. So how is the board supposed to flex now? He's even wrapped that gunk around the rails. He's cut his cloth in a butterfly shape, so he's avoided putting the cloth in a straight line across the rails, but what do you think is stronger? 6 ounces of fiberglass cloth in a straight line, or 1 inch worth of rock hard Q-cell? Now I'm going to be fair to Uncle Tony here, it's his personal board, it's not like he's doing it for a customer, he's not charging money, thank Christ for that, but this shit's on the internet, and people just repeat what they see, I can't blame them for that. So now you know, and now he knows too. I actually thought it would take ages to find a video example of somebody doing this, and that was literally the first video that came up when I searched how to fix a crease. But one of my videos was second, so that was pretty cool. So we're going for 2 patches of fiberglass over our repair. The first one, the small patch underneath, is going to be 4 ounces, and that's really just to cover our foam area that we've put in. And then the larger patch on top is going to be 6 ounces. So that's going to give the repair area a total of 10 ounces worth of cloth, but only 6 ounces of cloth over the parts of the board surrounding the repair but weren't damaged to begin with. The cloth of course wraps the rails as well, and it is really important, even if your crease doesn't crease the rails, it's only over the deck or only over the underside. Whenever you're fixing a crease like this, it's always worth wrapping the rails with cloth as well. The rails are your third stringers, or your second and third stringers, and in a board like this that doesn't have a stringer, it's really the only stringers, so you want to make sure you reinforce those rails. Once our cloth is laid down and we get all of our rails wrapped, then we want to pull out all of the excess resin from the cloth. With epoxy there's really no excuse because you've got 30 to 40 minutes of working time with it, so there shouldn't be any leftover drips or runs of epoxy. You want to pull off all that excess, especially on a board like this which is really going for light weight. We don't want to be adding a ton of extra weight to the centre of it. So we're going to leave that lamination overnight to cure and then come back and we can sand it the next day. And we want to work on feathering those edges down, blending them into the original part of the board. And then really, once we've done all the edges and gotten rid of all those highs, we only really want to scuff over the area above the repair. So this is 120 and a soft pad on my sander, and I'm basically just going to do 2 passes like this and that's it. We don't want to be sanding away and damaging the cloth we've just put on top of our repair. Same deal on the other side, on the underside of the board, so removing all those high edges of cloth and then just running over pretty quickly with some 120 on a soft pad just to scuff everything up, but not damage it and sand it away. Now once our topside resin coat is done, it doesn't matter if you do top or bottom first, but I've done the top side. The next day I come back, it's cured, so we're pulling the tape off and we want to do the underside. We could just mask up to the original line we've made with yesterday's pour, but I always like to sand that tape edge away and sand a little bit further up on the rails. So when we pour the other side, it just means that we're going to get 2 wraps of resin around our rails. And the rails are the most likely place to sand through and get exposed weave and all that kind of stuff. So if you can get a little bit more resin on your rails, it's just going to make sanding down the track a little bit easier. So then we're going to come back the next day and our resin should all be cured. So we're going to start off with 120 for the edges of our resin, then sand everything 240 on the machine, then 320 on the machine, and then we're going to wet sand with 400, and that's going to be the grit that we're painting over. So we'll stop at 400 wet and start painting. So a lot of you will know that I use Molotov paints pretty strictly for this kind of work. I think they're the best paints you can get your hands on. So that's what I use. But my one problem with Molotov is their signal white paint. It isn't a true white. In comparison to a board like this, it's kind of an off-white. But Molotov do have another product called Flame, and so usually up until this board I've been using their Flame Blue white. Don't be mistaken by the word blue, that's just the brand name. So Flame Blue is the brand, and then white is the colour, and it really is a true bright white. The issue with the Flame Blue though is it's a low pressure can, so it's really hard to get onto the board nice and wet and glassy like the paint that's on this board. So for this board I went ahead and bought a can of Flame Orange White, which is a high pressure, not a low pressure like the blue, it's a high pressure. And I hadn't used it before, so I thought I would try it out. And boy oh boy, that can is high pressure. It ejects a lot of paint very quickly, but unfortunately it's still really difficult to lay on wet and silky. So for that reason I had to pull the guide code out for this one, because there was just a lot of orange peel left in the paint job. I did of course clear coat over the white after it was applied, so this is clear coat we're sanding here with the guide coat, and that's with 600 wet. So now the whole board is ready for pinstriping and sanded at 600. So Molotov, if you're out there taking notes, it would be really nice to get the bright white that is in the Flame Blue and the Flame Orange cans into just your standard run-of-the-mill Molotov paints. Because that signal white, although it looks white on its own, as soon as you lay it down next to a really bright white board like this, or a paint like this, it's pretty clearly an off-white, not a true white. Just while we're masking up for pinstripes and putting them on, guys, I just wanted to say a big thank you to these guys, Pedro, Gareth, South County, MJ Rally and Suzuki Ton. Once again guys, thank you very much. I appreciate you being members of the channel, and for anyone else out there who wants to be a member of the channel, there is a link in the description below. It's a good way to support me, the channel, my small business, but kind of the dream with this channel is to be able to make enough money from it that any board I do a video on, YouTube actually pays the bill for the customer. So this crease we're doing today, for instance, one day hopefully I will be able to turn around to this customer and say, hey, I've made a video of your board, the video has paid your bill, you owe me nothing, here's your surfboard back. For members, you can see here there's a long list of members only videos, so I'm trying to do videos for members 2-3 times a week. Sometimes it's only once, but I am trying for 2 or 3 times a week. So they're just little snippets and catch-ups on things I've been doing that are sort of behind the scenes. And if membership isn't for you, I do also have a clothing store. There are links below to this as well. So if you're after an apron like I am, we're shit out of luck because they're temporarily out of stock, but there are mugs and stickers and shirts and hats and hoodies and water bottles, badges, the whole thing. So if membership isn't for you, but you would still like to support the channel in some way, you can always get yourself a shirt, a hat or a mug, but not an apron. So if you weren't too distracted by that egg down in the bottom right corner, you might have noticed that we did one black pinstripe and one grey pinstripe, because that's what the board had originally, but now looking at it, they're both black. So my grey didn't match the original grey. I knew that when I sprayed it on, but I didn't think it would matter that much. But once I peeled it off, it just didn't look that good. So I reverted that grey pinstripe to a black one as well. Thanks to our guide coat, which you know how to use now because of the last video I put out painting that surf ski where I showed you how to use it, our white paint has come up incredibly glassy, just like the original paint on the board. I wasn't really able to blend it because of the logos, but it came out pretty good anyway, even without a blend. Certainly good enough for a Superfish number 2. Well, that's it guys, you made it to the end of another long video, so congratulations and thank you to you guys. While we're on the subject of pop-out kind surfboards, leave a comment down below, let us know who your favourite local shaper is, wherever you live. Tell us who the shaper is, tell us the name of the city they're in, the country they're in, and yeah, let's see how many shapers' names we can get down in that comment section below. Until the next one, guys, I hope you're really well, and yeah, see you in the next one. Chee-hoo!